escalation in prices for residential properties in the past year, especially. Yesterday, Joe Cloutier, a local resident who has been building and managing affordable housing for probably 45 years, talked about the need to mobilize for workforce housing in the area, among a lot of things. Both talks were recorded and are available on the Rotary's website. And Representative Vicky Dudera of Camden also sponsored a discussion about affordable housing a few weeks ago. Today, we have 3 developers and advocates of affordable housing who will speak about the possibilities for Midcoast Maine. All 3 are housing development and property management nonprofit agencies with similar missions to improve lives and strengthen communities by providing affordable homes for people in need, from seniors to the disabled and more. All have done new construction and rehabilitation of existing buildings. Avesta is headquartered in Portland and has over 45 years of experience in housing. It currently has over 100 properties and 2,700 apartments and 2 assisted living facilities in New Hampshire and the southern part of Maine. We are pleased to have Rebecca Hatfield, their Vice President of Real Estate Development and Management, here today. And also we have Community Housing of Maine, or CHOM, headquartered also in Portland. They provide supportive housing for over 1,000 of Maine's most vulnerable people. CHOM already has housing along the coast up to Bar Harbor. Many of their properties house small numbers of people, such as a 6-unit development on Vinehaven, and extend to a 36-unit neighborhood in Booth Bay Harbor. We are very fortunate to have Cullen Ryan with us. He is the executive director and is also an advocate for affordable housing, working with state legislators this current season. And last but not least, we have Brian Seitz from Volunteers of America of Northern New England, located in Brunswick. They are also a nonprofit and offer housing and social services to support our state's most vulnerable groups. One of the things that they've done is at Togus, the VA hospital, I guess it's in Chelsea, they developed Cabins in the Woods, which is a 21 new small houses for U.S. veterans and their families experiencing homelessness. They note, I looked at their mission statement for these 2 years now, that Maine has almost 3,500 federally funded apartments that are nearing the end of their affordability, and they wish to focus on alleviating housing issues along the Route 1 corridor in the Mid-Coast area. So I wanted to give Cullen the first dibs on starting off today. So take it away, Cullen.
Great. Thank you, Mary Jane. And thanks for having all of us. We appreciate your interest in this and happy to have a conversation with you. And I think we connected last week and thought that it would be best if we could understand a little bit more about who you all are. So thanks for those nice introductions, but maybe we can hear from each of you and learn just what you do and what your interests are and what you'd like for this to cover so we can tailor it. And I'll just go around to people that I see. So Orion, I see you on my upper left. Can you we'll start.
Yeah, so I'm with Midcoast Economic Development District. So I'm here with Mary Jane. But I'd just like to see what all you have, I guess, done in the area. I guess that's more of my interest. I'm not originally from Maine, so I'm more interested in a little bit about what your history is. Mary Jane knows quite a bit, so I'll pick her brain about it later.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. And then Jonathan.
Yes, I'm a retired dentist, and in Camden Rotary, I have been heading up a economic workforce development series of speakers to cover everything from education and internet accessibility to really focusing a little bit on presenting things about housing. It's an experience we're using to educate ourselves and to see how we can make a difference. I have 2 other fellow Rotarians here that may speak a little bit more on that when they introduce themselves.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. And then Chip.
Hi, Colin. Chip Holmes. I am a recovering LIHTC syndicator from the greater Boston area. Now living in Camden for 3 years. I'm on Jonathan's committee, and both Rich Anderson and I, whom you either know or will get to know soon, have an interest in the affordable housing and attainable housing options available in the Maine coast.
Great. Thanks, Chip.
You bet.
And well played. Go from Boston to Camden and all that. Okay. And then Rodney.
Yes, I'm retired, but I'm on the reuse committee from the Klein School, which is being turned over from the RSU 13 to the city of Rockland. And also I retired after over 13 years as community development director of the city of Rockland with a focus on multifamily housing rehab.
Great. All right. Thanks, Rodney. And then Richard.
Okay, there we go. Okay, I'm as with Camden Rotarians as well. And in addition to the Camden Rotary Group, I'm actually chairing the Rockport Comprehensive Plan Committee right now. We're undergoing just beginning a new comprehensive plan activity, and on that, a economic development committee in Rockport. And what I think, just to add to what Jonathan was saying, that the Camden Rotarians are really trying to strike out a new role for Rotarians, and that is serving. We're a service organization, and we're dedicated to putting service above self. You take the Rotary motto, and we decided that one of the ways it might be fun to try and serve the community is in this area of improving the life of workers and the lifestyle of Mid-Coast Maine. And as traditionally, I guess you might say, Rotary tends to look at helping those that are on some low rung of the ladder and be better off. And what we're trying to do is find ways to move people up the rungs of the ladder as another way of serving the communities.
Great. Thanks, Richard. All right. And Brian.
Yes, I'm Brian Dancause, and I'm also with MCED, and apparently the memo went out to like all the staff because I see some other MCED faces and names and faces on here. But in any event, I mean, I do both small business lending and economic development more generally for MCED, and sort of goes without saying that if the workforce doesn't have an affordable options for a living, then all the business development that you do is going to be for naught. So because whether it's housing people that already live here or attracting talent, we need more and more affordable housing. So
Great. No, well said. That's exactly right. And Jeremy.
Yeah, hello. My name is Jeremy Martin. I'm the Planning and Development Director for the town of Camden. Prior to working for the town of Camden, I was Director of Permitting and Enforcement up in Bangor for many, many years. So I actually worked with Chom quite a bit on a bunch of projects up there with Aaron Cooper Ryder and Brenda Harvey. So glad to see that they're here. And in Camden, I'm responsible for code, planning, economic and community development, kind of all of the above, and housing is a critical issue. Clearly from Kittery to Bar Harbor along the coast. So I'm here and I'm diving into this as much as I can, and going to be working on land trust stuff as well, or housing trust, if you will. So glad this is all coming together.
Excellent, Jeremy. And we enjoyed working with you. And I think we'll spend some time talking about how when towns can help to meet us halfway, it really makes the job a lot easier and much more successful project. So thank you.
Yep.
Jane. You're still muted, Jane.
Pardon me, I'm sorry. I'm one of the select board members of Harpswell. And as a coastal town, we have very similar problems in terms of affordability. With COVID, we're seeing what appears to be or feels like a rise in newcomers to the town. We have the distinction of being the oldest town in the oldest state, so senior housing is a concern as well. But affordable housing for those who are not moving from other places and finding that housing in Maine is not too out of reach. So we have kind of a bifurcated community with some very wealthy people and people who are working and retired, who live on fixed incomes. So housing is a concern for many dimensions.
Thanks, Jane. All right, and then we've got somebody who's listed as town office. I don't know if you can unmute and. All right, we'll skip over that if that's not gonna do anything, but if you've not spoken and I think maybe your moniker is town office, let me know. And then Max.
Max just messaged me. He also works for Midcoast Economic Development District. His mic is not working.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And Nathan?
Hi, I'm on the Rockland City Council. I apologize, I'm not on video today. And housing is as much of an issue here as anywhere else. And in particular, I don't really know or understand much from a developer's perspective, so I'm looking forward to hearing that today.
Great, thanks, Nathan. And Hannah?
Hi, everyone. I am Hannah Sisk, and I am also with Midcoast Economic Development District. I'm excited to see just the developer side of things. This has been an ongoing conversation in the office and definitely an important issue that I know many in the Midcoast are trying to tackle. So looking forward to today's presentation.
Great, thanks, Hannah. And Ben?
Good afternoon, all. I'm Ben April. I'm the planning director for the city of Bath. I'm also a board member with MCED, and similar to what Hannah said, I'm glad that this is a conversation that MCED is putting on. It's been a conversation that we've been having with MCED MCED's been having internally for feels like a couple of years now. So I'm glad that this presentation has been able to move forward. And similarly, I think we all share the same concerns with housing availability, housing affordability, and having the right size housing for our populations throughout the state. So glad that this is going forward, and I'm excited to hear what you all have to say and speak with us today. So thank you.
Thanks, Ben. And Sam?
Yeah, hi, I'm the Executive Director of North Haven Sustainable Housing on the island of North Haven. And yeah, I'm just curious, I was curious to hear about anything housing related, and just to learn from the presentation.
All right, terrific. Okay, well, so we've got, I think we have until 2, and Mary Jane, I don't know if you wanted to also, I'm sure everybody knows you, but do you want to just take a minute too?
I'm all set. I'd just love to get going with what you have to say.
Okay, so we will tailor to what you guys are looking for, but it sounds like there's a lot of sophistication and knowledge in this group. People understand some of the tools that we're working with, obviously the need, and you've got quite a cross representation of the whole Midcoast. So thank you all for taking time out of your days to be here. We'll each probably take about 6 or 7 minutes, go through some slides, and then our hope is to really get into a dialogue with some questions and answers for the last 20 minutes or so. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen and onto here. Can you guys see that? I don't know how to make that full screen. If somebody does, let me know, but I'll just go through this. So can you see screen up? Great. All right. So this is, I'm with Community Housing in Maine. We're a very small nonprofit in terms of number of staff. We have 11 employees, but we collaborate with 50 service provider agencies and have housing stretched out between Sanford and Bar Harbor, 81 properties, I think, 778 units of housing. Most of it, well, actually, every bit of it has supportive housing, I guess with the exception of our property in Vinyl Haven, where we just don't have a partner there yet. But generally, we partner with service providers that provide support, serve people in housing, and we focus on homeless populations particularly. 3 of those groups in particular, the longest stayers in homelessness, chronically homeless, victims of domestic violence, and homeless veterans. So that's our about a third of the people we serve, about 1,100 people are homeless, and then another 100 or so are people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And, but those are blended into our population, into most of our housing, or we have small focused supportive housing. So I just want to describe what supportive housing. It's service enriched housing. It's affordable housing that has services attached to really make sure that homeless and special needs populations are successful in the community. And it takes the services to support people in being successful. Obviously, affordability is a factor. But there are really 4 types of supportive housing. First is a site-based housing first. You may have heard of this model. It's for people who are chronically homeless. And the idea is that no one's going to get well without housing. So just move people into housing, and people will naturally gravitate towards support and success. And so these have been successful bricks and mortar efforts at this. Logan Place, Florence House, Houston Commons. I'm sure Rebecca will talk more about those. The next is scattered site housing. First, this is also low barrier. It basically has a rental subsidy attached to a unit, and then support services that wrap around a person that moves in there. The success rate is also pretty high there, but it can be hard to find housing at the time when somebody's ready to go into it. Then we have dedicated permanent supportive housing. That's a lot of CHOMS housing. My organization has got a whole number of units that are focused on this. It's been dedicated to serve a particular population. It has a arranged service provider that's providing support, and that model seems to work extremely well. We've got a high success rate as well. And then the 4th is inclusive housing, and that's just straightforward affordable housing. It was mentioned about low-income housing tax credit. That's our primary vehicle, but we welcome in homeless and special needs populations with support wrapped around them, and they seem to be quite successful in those type of models as well. So those are those 4 different types. There's an initiative targeting the longest stayers in homeless. I want to talk about why and how come we zero in on people. This group of long-term stayers are homeless for 180 days in any 12-month period of time, and we decided as a state to start working on trying to house them. So we've been working on by name list efforts in Portland, housing this group. So far in this initiative's gone on just exactly 6 years. This month, probably next week or so, we've housed 325 of the longest stayers in Portland using a housing first approach. These folks had 575 years of homelessness between them, 145,000 total bed nights, huge numbers there, meaning that they basically were living at shelters and using beds night after night after night after night, or staying outside. And when we house them, we find they end their homelessness, they do well, and I'll describe a little more about that. But there's been a 93%, almost 94% success rate in housing this population, pretty remarkable. And that is just mainly scattered site apartments, just finding places for people to live, getting them a rental subsidy, and then supporting them there. So this works. And why we do this is because it costs $47,000 a year to have somebody in jail. It costs $1,000 when they touch an emergency room. Usually that means they launch into a hospital stay for another $1,000 a day or more. It costs almost $160,000 a year to have somebody in Riverview if they have psychiatric concerns. And we know that when people are housed, they tend to not need to touch those hospitals. And it costs, in contrast, it costs $14,000 to keep somebody in a homeless shelter. Pretty expensive, because it costs about $12,000 a year to have somebody stably housed. So it's even more expensive to have somebody in a homeless shelter than it is to have them in an apartment. But then even if they have services that are attached to them in that apartment, it still costs less than somebody who is staying in homelessness. So that's why we zero in on that. These are some figures as to why. And we looked at our by name list just a few weeks ago on March 18th, and took a look at the people, same group of people, long-term stayers that were housed. There were 445 people, and took a look at the unhoused group versus the housed group, and compared who was touching jail and who was touching hospitals. And we found out that there was 18.5 times higher incidence of being in jail for the unhoused group versus the housed group. That's dramatic. And there were 9 times higher incidence of being in the hospital for the unhoused group versus the housed group, also dramatic. And just going back to those costs, we know that this is saving a lot of money, because this population that's homeless for a long period of time tends to ricochet through all of our most expensive emergency systems, and they cost us all a lot of money. They don't do well, we don't do well. And when we house them, they stop touching these systems, they do well, and we do well. So we're actually working on trying to get initiatives through the legislature that will get everybody all working on the same page to house this group. It's a relatively small group, probably about 250 people altogether, maybe even closer to 200 people. And if we can get them all housed, we will see our jails a lot less crowded. We'll see our homeless shelters a lot less crowded. When you go to the emergency room, there'll be room for you instead of other people having psychiatric emergencies. And our hospitals will also be less crowded as well. So this is why we're trying to do this. Legislature seems to be agreeing, but again, it's really hard to change a system that's sort of left people to their own devices out there. In terms of creating innovative supportive housing, there's some things that we need. Obviously, we need some capital, and we're using things like the National Housing Trust Fund, which took about 10 years to come through Congress, and now since 2017 has been creating housing for particular supportive housing. It's combined with Maine Housing with project-based Section 8, which makes it work for deep targeting for the population. And but we also need support services. And there is a group called the Medicaid Innovation Accelerator Program that is working together to create a new, instead of an 1115I waiver, which is a type of waiver for getting Medicaid, we're actually going with something of a behavioral health home model for people who are the longest stayers and people who are ricocheting through systems to wrap services around them in a low barrier fashion. So those type of innovative support services are coming that wrap around people. And then we have resources to actually create bricks and mortar projects. But the other innovation is really to take affordable housing and to find ways through having adequate support services to invite and welcome in populations that are special needs or homeless so that they can be included as part of the community. So that's, the innovations are coming into services and the innovations are coming into straightforward housing to have it be inclusive. In terms of costs, we know that consideration, I think you'll hear from the other presenters, we've used prefab and modular construction. We are looking at trying to create long-term durability and sustainability for all of the housing. I think all three of us are going to talk about that. The idea is energy efficiency, particularly for everything. It saves us a lot of money. It saves the climate. And we have first really one chance to build a project, and that's our only shot at this. So we try to do it right. And there's challenged by things like cost caps that say, well, it has to cost only this much. And that can be really hard to do. Several folks are from Camden. We know that land acquisition is really high. It's high all along the mid-coast. It's high in other areas. And so when you start with those high costs, it's really hard to have a project at the end not cost a lot. So, but our average cost for units are, around 200,000. In terms of developments, it can be, around $800,000 for a small 4-unit supportive housing development. These are for small ones. And we need to look at, construction versus acquisition rehab. We know that housing like this that we try to acquire gets snatched off the market left and right, sight unseen by people out of state that can offer, $80,000 or $100,000 over asking price. But this is an example. All these are 4-unit buildings right here. This is actually a 6-unit up in Ellsworth. This is in Bangor. This is in Waterville. This is in Waterville. This is in Waterville. This is in Augusta. So just some examples, but at any rate, this is what it looks like when it's done. It looks nice on the outside. This building here, for example, was a gut rehab. It was just a frame sitting there. Somebody had abandoned a project of doing something on it. So we took an eyesore and made it nice about 11 or 12 years ago. So this is a pretty recent picture. It still looks like this today. So when we fix up a building, it looks nice on the outside. It looks really nice on the inside, and it has a huge purpose of getting people off the streets and into housing. This is a project up in Brewer. It's a passive house project, 48 units. This was the largest passive house in North America when it was completed, second largest. The other one was in Southern Oregon, so a different climate altogether. Passive house means that you basically super insulate the outside, make it incredibly tight so that somebody would suffocate inside if they were in there, and then add in ventilation systems to make sure people can indeed breathe. But we grab all the heat out of the air with heat exchangers. and triple glazed windows on here. And what we find is once you have this all in, it costs some extra money, but we get to subtract out a heating system altogether. So this building has no central heat. It has electric baseboard resistant heating, about the size of a third of a hairdryer per 3-bedroom unit. So just a tiny amount. I've talked to residents who have lived there for years and actually never turned on their heat because it just stays at 70 degrees in there all year round, just from things like their TV being on and the heat that is generated off of that and their activities of daily living. So this is what affordable housing looks like. It's a nice addition to the community. This allowed 48 families to live in Brewer. Here's a couple other examples. This is Elm Terrace down in Portland. This was a historic rehab, was LEED Platinum, historic, took an old building, added a wing to it where there used to be a historic building, and is housing women who are in recovery from substance use disorder and human trafficking, and also housing people with intellectual disabilities and other homeless populations, along with just workforce housing. And no one knows who is who. So a very successful project. This is one across the street that half of it is 55 and older. The other half is 55 and older, but have been long-term stayers in homelessness before moving in. Nobody can tell who it is, who's who. It seems to work out well. These folks are surrounded by support, and I will stop there. Thank you. And I don't know who's going next, Rebecca or Brian.
I can go next.
Okay.
Thank you, Cullen. And so I'm going to share my screen. Just a second. Okay. Can everyone see that okay? So again, I'm Rebecca Hatfield. I'm the Senior Vice President of Real Estate at Avesta. And so I oversee development, construction services, property management, and resident services at Avesta. To give you just a quick background about Avesta, again, it's a nonprofit housing provider that was formed in 1972. We have over 100 properties, almost 3,000 units across Maine and New Hampshire. Our portfolio comprises of mostly affordable housing that's both subsidized and unsubsidized through various programs, HUD, rural development, Section 8, tax credits. We also own 3 properties that are housing first properties, which Cullen briefly spoke about. That's low barrier housing for homeless individuals. And then we also own 2 assisted living facilities that are a combination of private pay and main care beds. Avesta has 5 areas of focus. So we do housing development, construct new units, property management. We also provide homeownership and financial education. We engage in a lot of advocacy at the local, state, and federal levels, and we have a focus in assisted living. So today I just wanted to go through one example of a property that we completed recently that can give you a sense of what we do. This is Bartlett Woods in Yarmouth, Maine. We completed it in 2017. It was a partnership with the town of Yarmouth and Yarmouth Senior Housing, which is a single purpose nonprofit in which the board members are all Yarmouth citizens. The nonprofit identified the need for more affordable housing. And so we started talking to them and decided to move forward with this effort. The other thing is the town also came forward and said that they had identified they really wanted to build more affordable housing. They recognized that this location specifically is right outside of Yarmouth Town Center. So it's very walkable to Town Center, and it has a easy access to activities of daily living, which is very important in identifying a site. And the town of Yarmouth was able to help in various ways, which I'll talk about in order to make this location work, which typically would be a fairly expensive location to build on. It was new construction, and it provides apartment homes for older adults that are 55 and over. There are a total of 28 units, mostly 1-bedrooms, but there's also a handful of 2-bedrooms. All the units are ADA accessible or adaptable. The units are income restricted to serve those at 60% of area median income or below, and the rent includes utilities. In terms of community features, there are a few kind of key community features, as well as there's a lot of ancillary services to support the residents. So the community features are, there's a community room with a small kitchenette for gatherings, there's solar on the roof and several energy efficient features. And then there's obviously a large outside patio, which is shown in this picture here. In terms of services for the residents, we have on-site health clinics like flu shot clinics, blood pressure clinics that are provided by Maine Health, free telemedicine services that are provided through Sensio Systems. We have a partnership with Southern Maine Agency on Aging, and they also provide services. There's a local community group that provides free rides to activities of daily living. We have a resident service coordinator to connect the residents with any other local services that they need, like Meals on Wheels. And then we also provide financial education classes that are specifically geared towards older adults. So an example is fraud avoidance and budgeting on a fixed income. When we built this, fortunately, we were able to lease to many residents that were within the local or surrounding area. We can't give a preference to local residents, but as an organization, when we're, especially when we're partnering with a town and there's identified a need, we do try and advertise locally and do a large on-the-ground effort to make sure we're marketing so that the residents, have the ability to get on the interest list. Moving into more technical details of the property, sources of funding were 4% low-income housing tax credits that were allocated through a competitive process. We use Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston grant and subsidized debt, which is another source that we often use in our developments. Maine housing subsidy and debt. We also received county home funds, and we were able to leverage energy tax credits from the solar. And then the town provided an affordable housing TIF, tax increment financing, which was a critical piece of the financing in making this work. The affordability is restricted for 45 years, and that's per the state and federal guidelines. But as a nonprofit, it's our goal and our mission to keep the properties affordable in perpetuity. So it will be much longer than 45 years. The town also provided a contract zone to facilitate density and to make the project more feasible. And then lastly, just to give you a sense of the timeline, this took 3 to 4 years to complete. So it's a year or so to identify the land, get it under contract, and then another year to secure the funding and go through municipal approvals. And the part of the reason why the funding takes so long is because, as I mentioned, it's all competitive. Applications only come around once a year, so sometimes it can take more than a year to cobble together all the sources that you need. At the same time, sometimes we need municipal approvals in order to make us competitive for those applications. So it is a long timeline to secure funding and approvals. It then usually takes 7 to 9 months for design and pre-construction, and then another year or so to construct. So that puts you at about 4 years. And I think that's all I have. I want to turn it over to you, Brian.
Yeah, let me get my PowerPoint going. So Volunteers of America Northern New England is we are a part of a national nonprofit. We're one of 33 affiliates nationwide. And as the national nonprofit of VOA likes to claim, we are the largest purveyor of affordable housing nationwide. Kind of depends on how you slice and dice the data on that one, but they like to talk about that. Mary Jane mentioned one of our most recent projects within the last 3 or 4 years, Cabin in the Woods up at Togus, on the Togus campus. It's actually in Chelsea, Maine. This is 20 cabins for veterans coming out of homelessness. They are 1 and 2 bedroom standalone units. and they range anywhere from 600 to 800 square feet. So it doesn't quite fit the tiny home footprint, but it's very, very close. They're very, very energy efficient. All the veterans are housed right there on the VA Togus campus. So they're right there right there near services. So just want to give you a quick visual of what part of that campus looks like. But, you know, as far as our, we're a little bit unique in that we're not just a housing developer. We also provide services as well. That's a major part of our business model, is providing group home services, whether it be to veterans or individuals coming out of with mental health or intellectual and developmental disability diagnoses. We also work a lot in community justice programs. We have a reentry center up in the Belfast area. We have several senior housing facilities around the state and one in New Hampshire. And we also offer a camp in the summertime called Camp Postcard, which is a pretty unique model in which law enforcement are actually the camp counselors, and kids come out and spend a whole week there, and it's no cost to them. And it's a great experience for everyone. So we provide a lot of services as well as a lot of housing development. And what that looks like, I'm not sure why my slides aren't advancing. So we have a few different types of models. What you're seeing here on this page are group homes, and Cullen will recognize two of the properties on this list because one, the Parish House up in Bar Harbor, is a project wherein CHOM actually owns and operates the facility. We run the programming within. That's it's 6 apartments for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, as well as a Veterans Career House, which we just took over from CHOM, gosh, a couple months ago. And that is what we call a grant per diem program through the VA for veterans coming out of homelessness. We just opened Harbor Place up in Belfast, which is this image here on the left-hand side. It's a 12-bed duplex, 6 on each side. 6 beds for individuals with mental health diagnoses, and 6 for intellectual and developmental disabilities. We're just now filling that up and getting staffed up. So that's a really exciting project that took us about 4 years to go from acquiring the house to renovation to licensing to launch on that. I also mentioned that we operate several senior housing facilities throughout the state. And we have a keen interest as part of our actual strategic plan to develop more housing, both senior and workforce housing, up through the Route 1 corridor, which we're working on. So I'll talk a little bit about a project right now we're working on at the AD Gray School up in Waldoboro. And I think Max is on the call, but it's a good thing he's mic'd because he might have a few a few things to chime in about this project. But you know, what we're looking at is taking an existing structure, which is the AD Gray School, which has been out of commission for, gosh, I think going on 12, if not 13 years or more. It's gone through a couple different developers' hands, and we really looked at this project. It fell right within kind of our wheelhouse of both preserving an existing structure that adds character and maintains some of the historic character and nature of the town, while providing more services to seniors in an area that's really desperate for senior housing. So what we've proposed to the town is developing, and this is just an aerial view of the first floor plan. I didn't want to go through all the plans, they're not that exciting, but the proposal on the table right now is to develop 32 one-bedroom units with a community area, mailroom, lobby, all those types of things that Rebecca was talking about in the earlier with the senior housing projects. And this is a long-term project. We've been working on this. We contacted Waldoboro, and I just say all this to kind of give you a scope of what this looks like for a town and what the engagement looks like. We've been working with Waldoboro on this since about last February. We've gone through several different pieces of the project, going to the planning board, and I'll go through what that looks like. But right now we are just in a phase where the property is going to go back out to a town vote. And we're developing an option agreement with the town to take ownership and to begin the financing part. So we're right in the heat of all of that. So what does this look like a little bit? So when we first started looking at the numbers for this project, I mean, we're looking at this project as potentially a $6.2 million project. That's based on 2020 estimates. We actually haven't run the cost analysis again, but since then, labor and materials have gone up dramatically. So that's very concerning and something that you should be considering when looking at these projects. And there's no one funding mechanism that's going to be able to fulfill this entire project. Low-income housing tax credit, we're hoping to hit it HUD 202, but we're not going to make it this year. Maine housing subsidy is always an option, as well as all the other acronyms, the CDBG and the Housing Trust Fund, the Affordable Housing Program as well. It's going to be an age-restricted facility, 55 plus or 62 plus. That really is contingent upon the funding sources we go after, and the commitment on that is 30 to 45 years. And what we tell folks in the community is that we're going to be there for the long haul. Whatever our contract with whatever funding funder says, we're going to be there for 100 years, and we want to be good neighbors. So we want to make sure that these projects are right sized and that they make sense for the community, and it's something that the community wants to get behind and support, because we want to be good neighbors. We don't want to just plop a facility in the middle of downtown Waldoboro that the neighbors don't like. So we've been working a lot with them to really set realistic expectations. We're still a year to 2 years out on our construction timeline, basically because of the funding cycles, as was mentioned before. So we're really right in the thick of it. So we've kind of gone through all these initial steps, the community discussions. We're still kind of going back and forth on letter of intent. We have a non-binding vote coming up. I'm sorry, we have a referendum vote coming up on the property transfer, and we still need to get our funding applications in. So we've got a little bit of a road ahead of us, but it's a great project, and we're super excited about it. And we think that the town will, the town is very supportive. We have the support of the planning board and the select board. But there are a lot of things that are community considerations that are going into this. Anytime you're proposing adding 32 new members to the community, or 32 members of the community moving into one area, there's always concerns around infrastructure. The neighbors are always concerned about, how does this impact my property lines? How are we going to address things like transportation? Is it going to impact things like general assistance? So those are all things we work through. Competing initiatives are a concern, particularly with this particular project. There's a park proposal. We love parks. We'd love to be right next to a park or right inside a park. But there's some competing initiatives that we have to work through. There's a lot of confusion in the community, and I think this goes for every single community. I live in North Yarmouth. We, senior housing and affordable senior housing is a huge discussion here right now with our select board. There's a lot of confusion over affordable versus subsidized. What does that mean? What is Section 8? What is HUD 202? Like, what are all these things? And especially if a community has had a negative experience with a subsidized housing project, as Waldoboro has with another project, it can make this process a little bit more difficult. And so we're kind of contending with some of that. A lot of community overlap in communities. I know the same goes for North Yarmouth, and as it does for other communities where there's a lot of committee overlap. And then there's right now, people are a little nutty. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation going on. It doesn't matter what the project is, and especially on these big development projects, a lot of they're complex. It's very easy for people to misunderstand things and misinform others. So there's some concerns around that. And then just local priority. That's something every project we deal with, is the question. The first question is, will, the residents of our community have first priority? Will their units be reserved? And generally the answer is no, but, to the point earlier, we will try to fill as many units with as many people from the area as possible first by marketing to them directly. So that's, I think I squeezed all that in under 7 minutes.
Questions we had so much to go on. I'm almost sorry we didn't stop after each speaker because you've given us so much information, but I'm sure there are plenty of questions out there, so people feel free. How about Rodney? Some thoughts?
Yeah, I'll start up. My question concerning financing is in terms of CDBG program and the TIP programs. When it comes to TIP programs, have you dealt with the municipal tax increment financing or the affordable housing TIF sponsored by the Maine Housing Authority? Because in terms of the project in Rockland, one of the suggestions we made was to use the TIF financing plus CDBG financing for the McLean School rehabilitation project.
Rodney, I can answer that. We have done that. In fact, we have a project right now that's using CDBG, and we have several developments that have TIFs. They're all affordable housing TIFs. They're not economic development TIFs. And as I mentioned, they are a critical component to making the finances feasibility. The other thing is Maine State Housing Authority incentivizes TIFs through their competitive process because it's a way for the local town to participate in the process and bring resources to the development. So I think it's an important financial resource and tool for towns to use to help make affordable housing feasible for their residents.
Yeah, I'll just ditto that and say that, CDBG is often a necessary gap filler because we get really close to having a project, but we're missing this piece. And when towns and municipalities or counties can put forth their CDBG funds, it can all of a sudden make a difference between a project not going to work and a project actually working. We also pulled together other sources of funds that Rebecca described, the Affordable Housing Program, AHP, loans out of Federal Home Bank out of Boston and other venues, and home funds. Fed Home is a source as well. But there are others. We often have 7 different funding sources in a given project. It's cobbling a lot of things together to try to make these things work. So when towns lean in and say, hey, we can give you a TIF, I can't tell you that's when there's just a handful of these projects that are successful in Maine in one round, it makes all the difference in the world.
Can I just add something there? This is Jeremy Martin. I think it's really important what Cullen just said. We struggle in Camden. Clearly, we had a project that was in the works and looking for a TIF. I think there's the perception, and I think what the gentleman from Ben from Volunteers of America pointed out is that it takes a long time sometimes to get these projects through the local. Sorry, Ben, it's Brian. I see that now. But it takes a long time to get them through the process and to get the community on board. And I think there's a lot of misconception. I think people think that developers are out there to make money, and certainly they are, but most of you, I think all 3 of you are nonprofits working in this field. I guess one question I have is, how do we, there's a lot of talk about, low income, homeless, and seniors and folks with disabilities. And clearly those are populations that you folks really do very well. I mean, I've had experience both with Volunteers of America up in Bangor and with CHOM in Bangor as well. And clearly those populations need assistance. But we're also in this, this real dilemma of workforce. People like myself, people probably like Brian and Hannah and, Max and Orion at McEd, where we're all trying to, survive here, and we need more workers here. We need a workforce development piece to this. And I just, I struggle to how does the state get on board, or how do we access other programs? And it seems like there maybe aren't any other programs out there for, the folks like myself, or a firefighter or a nurse that are trying to do this. I mean, I look at real estate in the Mid-Coast all the time, and there's, I think, 6 houses for sale in Camden right now, or 8. And I think the cheapest one is $650,000, and the most expensive one is $8 million. And they're all, I think, 4 of those 6 are $2 to $8 million. The others 800, and the other 650. How do we, our towns need workers. We need the life that families and young folks bring to these communities. And we're focusing a lot on senior housing. And I like what, the Rotary's talking about is, this is really about a lifestyle. This is about, what kind of community are we? And if we can't provide housing, or we can't entice or incentivize developers to build spec houses, or something, I mean, we've got a real challenge. And part of it to me is, you look at the cost of, Brian mentioned they got to reprice the 2020 project in Waldoboro. No doubt about it. A year ago, prices were at $300 a square foot for new construction. They're likely $350 to $400 now per square foot to build new. And throw in the land acquisition that Cullen mentioned. I mean, it really tips everything out of scale. Plus, we don't have workforce to have builders to actually build. So it's I think it's really got to be a multifaceted approach. It's like social service, to deal with those populations that are really underserved and have been underserved, that you folks seem to be serving very well. But we also need, the Department of Labor folks working on attracting workforce folks and the labor. It's just, we're all trying to get there, but I just don't, you look in Colorado right now, they're building houses at $125 a square foot. You can't touch that here. And it's just something with every single day on how to get my head around this. And you folks that are in this business of assisting folks with, that really need some help, are doing great things. And I think looking to you folks on how we can try to partner and maybe make projects half this and half workforce. Like, I don't know. It's a struggle. I wish the state would step up and really, assist the workforce piece, because, I see it all the time, senior projects going in, and we need some other projects going in. And I don't know how to do that. And I'm willing, and the Rotary seems to be on board to try to facilitate. I mean, there's a lot of groups that are starting to come together. But how do we do this? I don't know. Just some comments, if any of you have any comments on those thoughts.
Yeah, I just want to say you nailed it, Jeremy. That was extremely well said. I will say 2 things. And one is that when you look at Camden, for example, and you mentioned the cost there, we know there are enough millionaires, multimillionaires, and frankly, billionaires to be able to snatch up every single one of those properties in such a gorgeous town, and they will, and they're coming for them, it seems. So it seems to me that towns all up and down the Mid-Coast, which suffer from the ill effects of being gorgeous places to live, and attractive to people who will look on a picture and go, oh my God, I could live there and work on the internet and this could work out well. Towns have to assertively decide that they want to level the playing field for people who need to be able to afford to live near where they work, and to be that workforce that makes a town actually viable, to provide the services, the goods, everything that's needed for a local economy to actually work successfully. And we've seen what happens when towns skip that step. They become priced out, their workforce is outside, and they can't attract people to work at the local areas. And if they do, they have to pay huge amounts of money hourly basis to have them come in, because they have to account for the fact that people are driving, an hour or 2 hours away to get there. And it's just much more complicated than actually being proactive and assertive along the way. So a town can decide, hey, we're going to make sure that a certain percentage of the development that happens here is going to be inclusive of people who can afford it. It can decide with its TIF resources to promote these things. It can decide with its plans to that we're going to make sure that we account for this. Just one, the second thing is that you have to say what you're saying to the folks at Maine Housing, because they are doing a great job, but they're still under this fear factor of having a cost per unit weaponized, which a past treasurer did when he was on their board of commissioners. And they've been in fear ever since that the costs are going to get too high, and that by just putting an artificial cap on them, it will make everything go away. Well, what happens then is that housing doesn't get built on the mid-coast because it's too expensive to acquire the land and to actually make it work for all the reasons you just articulated. So we have to tell Maine Housing that one size fits all doesn't work, and that we need to have cost caps actually fit for localities and be realistic to have the housing actually created, and that we have to make this easier, not harder, and certainly not impossible. And the last thing is, don't get caught in this trap of affordability. We watched Portland do this recently, where they decided to create just set asides for housing for people who are between 100% area median and 120% of area median income. And I'm saying, they're describing this as sort of the missing middle. Well, the missing middle, as Dana Topman from Avesta would say, just exist. We've got people who are poor way underneath that. They are not homeowners. They're not going to be homeowners. They need to be able to rent. And the populations that can afford an entry-level home, they're not going to get rental subsidies. So but trying to create housing that's going to capture these folks sort of in this middle group that aren't our workforce, that aren't this other area, isn't a way to avoid this idea of NIMBY. We don't want poor people coming into our town. It's like, the fact is all of our towns have got people with a range of incomes, and we have to have housing for all of them. They're a critical part of the economy, but the push has to be on the low income end.
And I will say too, Jeremy, if I could just jump in there, the a lot of especially a lot of smaller towns, just their land use ordinances and their comprehensive plans just don't align with those goals. And I think that's that's kind of one of the cornerstones. It's got to be codified in some way, especially in these smaller communities. That's a goal. There's got to be some sort of encouragement and guardrails, so that when developers do come in, they're encouraged to build more right-sized units.
No. So real quick, we got two people that had their hands up, Jonathan and Jane. Jonathan, I saw you raise your hand first, so let you go, and then Jane, you can go right after him.
Well, I just really wanted to follow up on what Jeremy was saying, because that really does align with what Rotary is looking for. And I understood what Cullen just said, you can't select out a little segment. But since we're talking about categories of 100% to 150% of area mean, and it still doesn't approach area housing in the 5-town school district that Camden, Rockport, Hope, Appleton, Lincolnville are in, are there examples? I mean, you would think along the coast of Maine or the coast of other states that towns have done this. I mean, if you have a cross-sector attempt between private sector, public sector, nonprofit sectors, and you're not going to be getting Maine subsidies, you're not going to be getting the things that the three of you who are doing this are doing very well for that category. Who's done this? Who has pulled this off in the community?
I think I would have to say it's very, very, very hard to do. And the reason why I say that is because we have, I mean, we've worked with market rate developers before and done, we've looked at joint efforts where we're doing affordable housing with deeper targeting and they're doing kind of this missing middle piece, but they all are coming back to me and saying, it's not possible. And especially in this environment where construction pricing is really high and land cost is really high. And so I think that doing it without subsidies and doing it for that, as Cullen alluded to, and he said, our CEO at Avesta says the missing middle really doesn't exist. And the need is deeper targeting. And building without subsidies or without the programs is near impossible. I think you could talk to any market rate developer and they would do that. We have done some in Portland and more urban areas. We've done mixed income where we do a very small portion of the units as market rate, like 20 or 10% of the units as market rate. And we try and keep those rents lower than what the market is so we can kind of target this 60 to 80% of AMI. But even that's difficult because you can't subsidize those market units. You would have to have a TIF. You would have to have some other subsidies coming in that would help pay for those units because you're keeping the rents low. So the need is really, as Cullen mentioned, at the lower level, and you have to kind of use the resources that are available.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah.
And Jane?
Thank you. First, I want to say this has been very helpful for someone who is newly involved in the issues. And I was particularly helped by the comments in response to Jeremy's question about having the town having a commitment, a vision for inclusive development and so on. And we're at the point in Harpswell where we are belatedly reviewing our comprehensive plan. We know that there are concerns among the townspeople about what's happening with housing. And my question is, could you suggest, in addition to the planning, and a lot of ordinances need to be reviewed and updated in any case, in addition to that, what are some of the early steps that a town needs to take as we begin to discern what our needs are and what kind of strategy we can have so that Harpswell stays the way the people in Harpswell would like, continues to be the Harpswell that they would like it to be, not stay the same, but continues to be a Harpswell that they like.
I won't have much, but I'll throw out one early one, and that is that we talked about land and building acquisition as really getting out of control.
Yes.
It seems to me that that's not going to go away. Once there's upward pressure, we saw the last recession, may not really get, dip back down very much. It just seems to keep going up. So in a town like Harpswell, I think the town planners can start thinking about areas that might be good for there to be affordable housing, start contemplating the size, and start contemplating things in zoning that would be favorable to that. And then one more step, which I haven't seen a lot of towns do, but often is something they can do, is to see if they can grab up some land and hoard it in the location that needs to, that would be work the best. So whereas many people may be aiming for the coastal views in Harpswell, where people who are seeking affordable housing, they're usually looking for the heart of a community where things are walkable to them. So where is that in Harpswell? And, are there, you don't have a great deal of spot there, but maybe there's some land that is within a couple thousand feet of a central part where there's, some a store and a couple of other items where people can get some of their needs met. And that might be most attractive. And then what can we do with zoning to create density in that area where we can use, some type of a sewage system or something that will allow multiple units to be created, because in order to make things work, there's a certain size that we need to cross in order to make these things viable. And that's, we're looking at, usually something over 25 units, although we've seen some smaller projects get done that are in the teens and sometimes even smaller, but they're harder to do as you get smaller because you're competing with these cost caps that are based, on this crazy factor of a cost per unit. And what that does is drive for more tiny little units that are efficiencies, because you count one of those instead of a 3-bedroom apartment. Well, that drives out families in that development, doesn't it? So, but trying to create some density in a small part of the town where you think some sizable number of people could live, that will also attract some businesses.
I'm sorry that I was smiling because our 2005 comprehensive plan proposed village centers and higher density, and it was trashed by the people who lived in those areas. So it's a good idea, but it didn't fly 15 years ago. With the pressure we have now, maybe people would be more amenable. But thank you for that.
So I saw one other person, Chip, he had his hand up. I know we're after 2 o'clock, so Chip, if you can go ahead and ask your question.
I'll be very brief.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, I was just looking at Brian's project, and what Cullen just said is you need a certain product volume to get your loaded cost of a unit to a manageable number under state guidelines, and be it for rental housing, or we looked briefly at the subdivision program that Maine Housing has, where they'll kick $20,000 towards your infrastructure if you sell the units from, I'm guessing around Maine, 200 to 250 or 60, depending on where your property is located. Brian's 2-year-old math says it's just under $194,000 per unit to create in a rehab 32 units. And a rehab is typically, if I'm not mistaken, a little more efficient than ground up new construction. So am I correct, Colin, that around the state, you're looking at 200 plus per unit to get them up, go into a subdivision and build up, and that's under subsidized programs, correct?
Yes, I think you're right, Chip.
Yeah, and the lane that I think we at the Rotary have been exploring, and I think Jeremy did an excellent job laying it out, is that stripe, the occupant that are at your 60% rents, your firefighters, nurses, local technicians in various businesses, and maybe on up to young entrepreneurs whose incomes won't drive the debt to acquire a new construction home, because as I think Martin said, they're in that 450 range. And these incomes are driving maybe 3.25 to 375 beginning incomes. And that's a tough one because there's just nothing around that we can see to help. You may get a little help from the local banking on a first-time home buyer, but there's precious little at the state level. And I wonder if there's even the opportunity to lobby Maine Housing. I mean, the guys up there are really great, guys and gals, but are they going to listen to that lobby while they're still trying to create as much affordable rental housing as they can?
So Chip, I'll make one correction. When we originally proposed that project, we proposed it at 25 units, and I believe those numbers were based on 25 units. So I think it was going off a figure about 275.
Yeah. I saw 32 on the print, and
yeah, and I think when I put the numbers in there, I just grabbed from the wrong sheet. So I apologize.
Not a problem. But that, where I was getting is the loaded cost for subsidized development, i.e. the development itself being subsidized, not necessarily the rents, is driving per unit costs that are barely saleable if you were reselling those units. And that's, enough from me, but that's the stripe that I see that's going to be so difficult to try to make something happen in. Market rate developer isn't going to knock 30% off, if he can, the resale price of the last house, because he may not get the next one.
right.
Anyway, I think the presentation all the way around today was just great. And thank you.
Well, yeah, so I would also like to say thank you to Brian, Rebecca, Cullen. I know we're after 2 o'clock, the 1 hour we had allotted for you three to come on. So Mary Jane, do you have any closing statements that you would like to?
I'm very appreciative too of the time that you've taken, and we're going to be back at 5 o'clock tonight. And it is hopefully getting recorded today.
Yes.
So if anybody that you know is interested, hopefully they can see this, because you've presented us with so much information. I think I'm going to want to look back at what you've put out, and I really appreciate that. One funny note, I guess in South Dakota, they've had prisoners at one prison building affordable housing, single family housing, since I think 1998. And I'm curious, with all the increases, what it's like these days, but they've been affordable units. Of course, in our area, it's the land prices that are tough, but they have done something very different. But I'm very appreciative of everybody that's been here today, and we've had great questions, and everything's been really helpful. So thank you very much for being here.
All righty.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
A good one.
So we'll keep going. See what we can
Thank
do.
you. And thank you, Mary Jane, for putting them on.
You bet. We're going to have our last discussion in probably 3 or 4 weeks, dealing with what communities can do. So it'll be zoning things, and we'll try to tackle that issue as well.
Mary, can I just comment on that, or just,
You bet.
I don't know if people are sticking around or not.
Yeah,
I think it's really, we hear a lot now, and Vicky Dudera's got something going on, and there's some bills in the legislature about forcing communities to do X, Y, and Z to, facilitate affordable housing, and what towns should do, or I think in some cases they're trying to mandate what towns should do from a zoning perspective to facilitate it. And we're missing I think we can do all those things, but we are missing the point that, and we're not having the discussion about, there are no builders to build, and there's the costs for materials, not to mention the land, are through the roof. And so we can do everything we possibly can in Camden, for instance, to facilitate, dense, affordable housing. But that brings no one to the table, right? If there's no one to build it, and the money's not there because it costs too much. So I don't want to give people the wrong impression that by towns doing something, we're going to see, a flood of new housing in town.
Yeah.
We in Camden, we allowed accessory apartments. We changed those rules to facilitate more. We've had a handful of those in the last year since we did that. Belfast has done the same thing. They've really seen zero, if any, new accessory apartments added. And I think because the labor and the costs is too much. And it's not that towns aren't doing things from a zoning perspective. It's just that we can only do that. We don't have the ability to go beyond that. Yes, we can do affordable housing TIFs, but we're kind of stuck there. And we need some push somewhere. Again, I don't know what it is. I've been racking my brain for many years on this stuff, and I've met with the Island Housing Trust out on MDI. We're looking to start something similar to that on the mid-coast, which would be a great thing. But again, it's the cost and the labor, and you can't find a contractor to build a deck for you. How are you going to find all the contractors that you need, affordably to build a house for you? You just can't do it. So I don't want things to be, it appears that like there's a lot of talk on the towns need to address their zoning issues, zoning. And yeah, we can, and we should, and make sure our comp plans are lined up to support that. But if we don't have the workforce, and no one has the capital to actually build, we're not going to get that change. So I don't know how to crack that nut.
I agree with you, Jeremy. I've been bugging a lot of colleges and different programs saying, how about getting some more in the building trades and electricians? Because I've been in that area for a while, and the whole
Yeah,
country's a mess. And now
that's
with,
true.
I don't know if COVID made things way worse with supplies, but you
It
know,
did. Yeah.
so I'm hoping that will improve, but who knows?
It's nice to see, Joe Cloutier was on with the Rotary yesterday, and I've chatted with Joe multiple times. He's, submitted a proposal for the town Sagamore Farm property. But I'm encouraged that he's looking and his company's looking more at, working with, and if you look at Oxford, Maine, where we used to have lots of manufactured housing facilities, I think we have one left. I think it's just KB Homes left there. Outside of that, everything's coming out of Canada, but that's a good way. And I think Joe's working with one of those firms to actually give them designs, build it in the factory, and then they just have to put the pieces together on in the field. And they're also looking at 3D printing homes, which is a neat, really cool thing. I also serve on the state's Building Codes and Standards Board, which regulates the building codes in Maine. And so I will say we are trying to look at different things within the building code. Are there things that we can do? Mass timber construction would definitely lower price of some cost of lumber and materials, but it's just, we don't have the industry like we used to. I think housing would be very different had we had the modular outfits still building homes in factories. And we just don't have that anymore. And I don't know what's really changed and caused that to change, but far more cost effective. I met with someone today who's putting a cape in. It's a 28 by 40 cape, and he's getting it set on the foundation at $165,000. So there's ways to do it, but not a lot of people doing it. So
It's true. Hey, Jonathan.
Well, it's really a follow-up to what Jeremy was just saying, but my comment is about your next meeting. Is it possible to have someone there who has expertise in the marketing that it would take for a community, municipalities, and community members to make it popular and attractive to those significantly wealthy individuals who do buy a property around here, to make donations, grants possible? It's not, right now, it's not sexy. It's not like giving a library that's named after you. But if I don't know how to do it, but you need a gut milk campaign to make this a desirable thing for those who are driving prices up to help.
Yeah, no, you mentioned that, and that's exactly where my head was. I was thinking the same thing of what you just brought up. So
there is a bill in the legislature and one of the Kessler out of South Portland has a bill in the legislature right now to assess a tax on non-primary resident homes. So if the home is not your primary residence, you're going to pay a tax. I think it's 10% of the value of that home annually to the state. And supposedly that's going to go into a affordable housing fund. But that's in the works in Augusta. Lots of states do that. I know Massachusetts does it. I mean, we have a lot of people that have, they live out of state. They have a house in Camden. They have a house up north in Maine, multiple houses, and they're here, a month or two a year. So there is some movement in Augusta to try to capture something from them. And that would help the short-term rental issues as well, I think.
I think that's good, Jeremy. I think you could have a significant impact on the positive side. That's a little bit of the punitive side.
I agree. I agree. I totally agree.
Ben, I have a hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Jumping off of what you were saying, Jonathan, I would love, I think it might be a separate but related conversation, but I would love to have a MCED conversation on some of the land banking legislature that is kind of moving through the state right now. And similarly, I would love if there is any community that has opportunity zones that has figured out how to utilize those. We have not had any progress in using our opportunity zone here in Bath. So if that was something that could be a conversation between folks, we would love to have a better idea of how to promote that and how to get folks invested in kind of bringing that investment back into communities. So.
Okay. Can work on that.
Ryan.
Hey, Rich.
Yesterday, Joe Cloutier also talked about the idea of an overlay zone, attainable housing, workforce housing overlay zone. And I know, Jeremy, you said there wasn't anything in Maine. You weren't aware of any such attempt at that. Can one of you explain a little bit, make it a little more clear? What does it mean, an attainable housing or a workforce housing overlay zone? What's an overlay zone? What does that mean? What does that look like? Why don't we have something like that?
Who wants to go after that one? Me? All right. Yeah, I'm not familiar with any affordable housing overlay zones in the state of Maine. And so what an overlay zone is you have your underlying zoning district. So in Camden, we have, say, the Village District in a certain part of town. And we also have other overlay zones would be similar if you had a community that had a historic preservation ordinance or downtown review ordinance. So not only or shoreland zoning is an overlay zone as well. So you have your underlying zoning, and then you have these other overlay zoning district that apply. So, and there's ways to do it. Again, I've never looked at an affordable housing overlay zone. We do have a BOZ, a business opportunity zone in Camden, which does require someone to have a residence on the property. No one's taken advantage of that. I will dive into the overlay zones. My gut says it's I haven't seen one put into play in Maine, but that may reduce standards for density or parking or those kinds of things if you're doing affordable housing. Now, for me, I'd almost rather than do an overlay zone, just put those standards into the zoning ordinance that, projects that are, low to moderate income housing projects, you only need one parking space per dwelling unit instead of two. Or, density, reduce the density across the board in certain zones rather than necessarily having an overlay zone. It's just another way of doing, cracking the nut, if you will. I think sometimes Camden can, lots of coastal communities can be challenging because people, they like what they have. They don't want to see it change. And they always think that, some new development is going to change everything. And they forget, Camden's this really interesting thing. We have the tannery site, which was forever a tannery. It was a mill, huge mill. And then the town spent $1 million to demo it and clean it up. We're still spending money to clean it up. Tried to get a development project in the works. We had a housing developer that came in ready to do a project. The town select board, they were keen on it, but we're fighting the battle of the neighborhood in essence. And so, you got to have these, and I think we tried to lay that project out as best as we could. But it requires, and oftentimes the people that are most outspoken about something are the people that oppose something. And so the people that sit there at home and really love the idea of a project, but they don't show up or they don't, express themselves. And we end up listening to, or the political folks end up listening to people that speak the loudest. And so it's important for everyone to have their voices heard. I mean, that's a prime location. It's walkable to a $30 million brand new middle school, walkable to the downtown. I mean, it's a prime location it's got sewer and water. It's a prime location and we couldn't get it done. Not yet anyway. I'm still working on it. I'm not giving up on that one. So one thing we also, the developers didn't say, but they talked about all these credits, and they get points for things like transportation. Do you have public transportation nearby? You know, that's something that I think in the Mid-Coast we can try to work on potentially with some organizations to try to at least get van routes. Mid-Coast Transportation works out of Belfast. They drive to Lincolnville, they drive to Camden. It'd be good to get them to at least come up with some consistent routes, and it may help, you know, developers get more points when they go for their tax credits and things like that and their subsidies. And Jonathan, yes, it is the tannery site.
Yeah, and I guess, Jeremy, so what I understand what you just said about the overlay zone idea is that sort of just like there's a shoreland zoning that while in a certain district or zone wherever my house is, if I'm on the ocean, I can do it. But if I have more restrictions, let's say, or different restrictions if I'm in that overlay zone. And so even though I'm in the residential, this has, and so that if I had an overlay zone for attainable workforce housing, if it is a workforce house, then I could have, it could be right next door to another house that has different restrictions. I have less restrictions. And the difference between I guess you said, well, why not just make it a zone across all zones? I guess what you're saying is that in every zone, if it's attainable housing, it doesn't have to have these restrictions, regardless of what other restrictions there are in whatever zone it is. Is that what you're saying?
I guess that's kind of what I'm saying. And for me, it's really, you know, zoning districts have the uses that are allowed and they have development standards, but somewhere else in your zoning ordinance, you have these standards, performance standards for parking and, you know, lot coverage and those kinds of things. And, you know, those kinds of things, you can still cater them to specific zones in your ordinance without doing an overlay zone. You could say, if you're going to do affordable housing, you know, in the village zone in Camden, affordable housing only needs one space per, you know, one parking instead of two. You can do those things. The cost of land and the cost of site development, I think people forget about, and I'm glad Cullen brought it up. The cost is significant on development costs. And if you can reduce the amount of parking they need to build, that's less pavement they need to spend, you know, I mean, it just keeps adding up.
And the amount of land I can cover, if it's in a general house, I can cover more of that lot than if I'm a private home.
Yep.
I mean, a standard private home. Okay. Okay, good. That helps. And I just, on the other part of it is, it just strikes me that the NIMBY idea, that I think that I think, Jonathan, you were asking, maybe can we some marketing ideas? Well, how about some marketing ideas for selling defeating the NIMBY problem? In other words, that here's where I would got to think about, here's where maybe some of us could help the town, where the town can't market why this is a good idea. It could be that another organization, we could get some collaborators that would mark a marketing campaign for selling the tannery project with the apartment building, let's say, if that's what is an example, that let's create a marketing campaign. The town can't, but let's create a marketing campaign, and the developer can't because the developer's in his own interest. And so what about a third party, though, that might create a marketing campaign for the apartment building on the tannery project, as an example? I'm not saying that's
right
what we should do, but just as an example.
Yeah, I mean, every time I've ever worked with developers and that I knew or felt something was going to be contentious in the neighborhood, and again, I've spent 20 years up in Bangor. Anytime anything was going to be contentious, and it's, you know, the city or the municipality has a certain role and a certain function, and we've got to stay within that function. But I've always encouraged those developers or those folks that were interested to reach out to the community, the wide community, and the neighbors, and, you know, do their due diligence. You know, they work it, meet with folks, have coffee with them, you know, just be in the neighborhood and talking to them so that, you know, they hear what neighbors' concerns are, and they can try to, you know, like stunt those concerns, because most all of it, you know, are concerns about much ado about nothing, to be honest with you. 15 years from now, no one will know that there was any issue, there were any concerns likely, because, you know, life would be back to normal and people would be living their life. And it wouldn't be an issue anymore. And I think that's the biggest piece, is to really just those developers and those entities, whether it be a third party group. Yeah, I mean, I've seen them in Bangor on contentious ones. They've hired, you know, advertising and marketing companies to come in and do that work for them, and get the word out.
I guess what I'm saying is the third party really would be independent of developers, and that, so there's a workforce housing coalition, let's say, or let's our favors, and let's create another nonprofit that is a workforce coalition nonprofit. I hope not, but let's say there is a group that would just, their goal is to, and they don't care who the developer is,
right.
Is as long as it buys into, it meets certain criteria for workforce housing, they're gonna get behind it, and they're gonna, if there's multiple developers still in running, they're gonna develop somebody. Let's get to approve this and let the other rules define which one wins it. But let's just get it approved that there is going to be an apartment building on that property, let's say.
Yeah. I'm all for that.
Could I ask a question of Mary Jane, Jeremy, and Ryan? We recently had a discussion with Jane LaFleur, who does Community Heart and Soul, where they start at the bottom and ground up to get community support. She named a lot of communities around us. Are you guys familiar with that? And how many of those communities ended up talking about workforce housing as an important to their community? Because if you do that and it's not even on the radio when you get done, that doesn't really solve anything.
Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar. That's the Orton Family Foundation's program.
Out of Vermont.
Yeah, out of Vermont. I have not seen one that's focused, really had a focus on affordable housing. But I mean, it's a good model. It requires a lot of time. I mean, it requires a lot of staff, a lot of time. And I think that's what is hard sometimes, is that I'm pulled in every direction possible every single day. And, you know, it requires a significant amount of time and, you know, commitment. Definitely worthwhile thing. And I'm going to reach out to Jane to try to get her to try to do something similar in Camden. May not be that full on heart and soul program. But
well, Jeremy, that was just the thing. We don't think that we're interested in that right now, because we have some focuses that we want is in the economic workforce development, where we want to go. And that really, you have to set aside what you want and go back and start grassroots to find out what they want. That's why I'm asking the question. How common was it?
Yeah, Jane, you know, the minute we started talking about it, Jane said, yeah, but you don't know that that's what the community wants. And so we walked away, and we says, thanks, Jane, but we know we want, whether the community wants it or not.
You're the community.
We are.
Yeah.
I just say, I know one thing, I was at the Maine State Planning Office for a long time ago, and a gentleman came in trying to do a different type of planning, which was kind of, I think he kind of called it hole in the donut. So any development that came in, he'd include all the neighbors all the way around before it even went to the planning board, to try to figure out what their concerns were. And maybe they'd end up with something like just a simple bike path that went through their development and connected neighborhoods that they didn't have before. So something that starts out in a friendlier way than going to the planning board and getting everybody riled up.
That's exactly what they need to do every time. That's a successful project.
All right. Well, it is after 2:30 now, so I'm gonna kick y'all off.
Thank you.
This is a great conversation, though.
Dominic, you haven't said a word sitting out there in New York State there. What do you? Anything to say before we leave?
Who?
Maybe this guy Dominic, I don't know.
Dominic.
Oh,
Dominic,
Dominic.
he's a Rockport resident.
He
He's
could-
one of them that would not like what you said, Jeremy, about the tax on the part-time owners, because Dominic is one of those.
Yeah.
You know, I guess one thing I always feel like with part-time owners is, you know, when you need to go to the hospital or you need a fireman to show up at your house and they can't afford to live in your town, that should be a consideration, you know.
There you go.
Yes.
Okay,
All
well,
right,
thank you.
thank you.
All right, everybody. See
Thank
y'all.
you. We'll keep it going.
Thank you.
Yeah.